are going to be talking about the free legal clinics the school hosts, 13 of them actually. And just a brief introduction about Professor Tenenbaum. He's an expert in the field of litigation. He has practiced in courts throughout the United States as well as in foreign jurisdictions, and he serves as a commissioner of the Uniform Laws Commission. He consults as a member of the Tenenbaum LLC. And me, by the way, I'm a reference librarian. I'm Sangeeta Bhargav, and I welcome Professor Tenenbaum and Jack for their presentation. The program will be recorded. The handouts will be sent out once the program is over and once I receive the handout from Professor. Those online, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box and ask the questions. And at some point, once the professor is ready for questions and answers, he will respond to them. Okay, Professor, it's yours now.
You want me to go over here?
No, you're fine right here.
We're fine right here, okay. Thank you very much. Jack and I are pleased to be here. Jack's graduating, actually. He's going to be working in the San Francisco Bay Area, doing intellectual property work. The way we've divided it up is Jack's going to give you an overview of all the various clinics we have, and I'm going to then specifically discuss the clinic that I run and talk to you about how we fight fraud in litigation and what you can do to help yourself avoid being defrauded. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Jack to talk about the clinics.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here too. As I already stated, my name is Jack Lane. I'm a 3L at the Northwestern Investor Protection Clinic, and I will just kind of give an overview on what the Bluhm Legal Clinic does and what the various centers within the clinic do. We're just one of a vast number within the clinic that all of them are doing really fantastic work, and a lot of this information is going to be within the pamphlet, but hopefully some new stuff here too. So as an overview, the Bluhm Legal Clinic has 20 different clinics and 12 different centers. It was founded in 1969, but it's really exploded from there. What's unique about the legal clinic at a law school is it gives students direct experience working with legal issues, and I think it's 90% of students who come to Northwestern in each graduating class work with the Bluhm Legal Clinic in some way, shape, or form. And so this will differ from kind of more traditional legal aid organizations where it's going to be attorneys taking cases. This is really students working hands-on directly with clients and taking legal issues from really start to finish. In terms of numbers, hundreds of clients every year receive at least some sort of assistance from the legal clinic, and the range of clients that the clinic serves, right? It's talking about teenagers tangled in the justice system, it's entrepreneurs looking to navigate the small business landscape, it's everyday homeowners who are facing eviction, and really many more. It's also, the Bluhm Legal Clinic's widely recognized as one of the top legal clinics in the country, and speaking from my own experience at least, it's one of the things that drew me to Northwestern. It's a really phenomenal place. So to kind of get into what each of the centers and the clinics do under the kind of overview of the Bluhm Legal Clinic, kind of take it alphabetically. First, the Appellate Advocacy Center. This center houses two different legal clinics. It houses the Federal Appellate Clinic as well as the Supreme Court Clinic. So here, students and the people working in the center are taking cases that have been lost at trial, but going now on appeal. And then there's even an appellate concentration that students can focus on if that's the direction they want to take. I have several friends who do this kind of work, and it's really cool what they're able to do at both the appellate and the Supreme Court level. The center also provides moots, kind of practice arguments for people who are going to before the Supreme Court. And it's just kind of an example of some of the work the appellate center is doing.
That help you?
No, I got it.
Yeah, okay.
As some kind of the work that we've been doing at the Appellate Center, a recent case in the Ninth Circuit from 2021, Salinas v. Garland. Our center filed a brief in support of our client. It resulted in the government kind of capitulating, moving for a full remand. This was an immigration case that had been handled improperly at the lower court level, and it was a full victory for the client. She got a new trial on the proper bases. And then the Supreme Court, for example, Rahafe v. U.S., there was a firearms statute for undocumented individuals, and the Supreme Court reversed based on the work that the Appellate Center did, where the government now must prove both knowledge of the possession of the firearm and knowledge that the person who is possessing the firearm is in fact undocumented. So this was a nice win in terms of that case. So that's kind of the Appellate Advocacy Center. Moving now to the Bartlett Center for Trial Advocacy. So this houses a lot of different classes in terms of just teaching about trial. It also houses our competitive trial teams. Something really cool about the Bartlett Center is more than 100 faculty, adjunct faculty. This is lawyers, even judges, all sorts of different legal professionals in the Chicago area come to Northwestern to teach. There's classes for students on how to handle pretrial, what happens before you go to litigation, how to handle discovery, getting evidence from the other side, evidence itself, what are the rules, and then also practicing trial. It also has several different trial teams. I've been fortunate to be on one of these trial teams. They compete nationally, and they've had a lot of success over the years. It gives really practical experience for students handling opening statements, directs, crosses, everything you've seen in court. It's what students are able to do and handle. The interesting thing about the Bartlett Center is this is all simulation based. So instead of these other clinics and centers you're going to hear about, the other 10 that I haven't gotten to yet, where these are handling real cases, real clients, the Bartlett Center is completely simulation based. So it's very kind of controlled and really still practical for students. Looking now at the Center for Externships, this is a really cool program where students can find placement in really any practice area they want. Looking at civil rights agencies in Chicago, federal or state government, the federal or state judiciary, corporations, basically anything you want to do, any direction you want to take your career, you're able to find a placement, and you do coursework 12 to 15 hours a week where you're doing everything that a person in that field would do. At least from my own experience, I did the judicial practicum. This meant I was in a courtroom working with a federal judge. I was writing opinions for the judge. I was sitting in court watching cases that otherwise wouldn't have seen. And then there's also a classroom component where we're really looking at kind of laws more broadly and how does the judicial system function. And so it's a really nice connection of both how our legal system should operate, and then you're placed and you're able to see how the legal system does operate, and it gives kind of experience that you wouldn't otherwise have in the course of a law school curriculum. There's also a really cool program where students are placed in San Francisco for a semester. They get to work with high-tech startup businesses and take business classes. So if you're looking to do that kind of work, that's something that the clinic does at the Center for Externships. Moving to the Center for International Human Rights, you can probably guess that this does handle a lot of issues in international law. A lot of these issues are novel issues, and these give students direct involvement in really difficult, complex cases that they otherwise probably wouldn't get to experience. There's several class offerings that kind of give students an academic view of this, as well as a 4-year JD-LLM program that's pretty unique in terms of focusing on international law. There's opportunities for students to take international trips, oftentimes to very African nations, European nations. I know there's at least an example recently where students went to Malawi and interacted directly with wrongly detained prisoners there. They also consult with the UN, for example. So there's a lot of really interesting work happening at the Center for International Human Rights. The Center for Mediation, Negotiation, and Dispute Resolution. This clinic places a strong emphasis on the skills of negotiation and other forms of alternative dispute resolution. This is renowned through the country with kind of the rigorous coursework we put students through in terms of the focus on negotiation, which is really a practical skill that is critical in the legal practice, aside from just kind of how to handle a case at litigation, but also how to kind of deal with negotiation, settlement, other ways of resolving your disputes that don't involve going to trial. There's a lot of work that happens with other centers here, kind of implementing alternative dispute mediation in other forms of law. And there's also an externship program where students can work with mediation hands-on. There's also negotiation competitions, kind of like we had trial team competitions. There's similar for negotiation. And they even work with other schools in Northwestern broadly. So obviously business negotiation is an important skill. There's a lot of work hand in hand with the business school. And I think that's something that is true of the centers, is they are very working hand in hand, not just with the law school, but other areas where their needs are used. Center for Wrongful Convictions. This is maybe a particularly popular center, at least in Making a Murderer, the Netflix documentary. They did work appealing Brendan Dassey's coerced confession. So this may be one that you're aware of already, but this is a center that's done a lot of really great work freeing more than 40 innocently imprisoned people. And the center focuses on kind of strong insights that lead to these like illicit convictions of innocent people, where you're looking at improper eyewitness testimony or coerced confessions in the case of Brendan Dassey, or poor forensic evidence, and they're working with experts to not only fix the issues that you already see, but also preempt them and make sure people who have coerced confessions aren't stuck getting convicted when they really don't deserve it. There's a ton of really great examples of innocent people getting freed. And another one, Mr. Burton, who was released a few years ago, his confession was coerced as a teenager without a lawyer or a guardian present, and after 2 decades, the center was able to get him out. This is the kind of work that they do on it all the time. The Children and Family Justice Center. So this, there's a clinic as well as within the center, and it focuses really on youth. They're either threatened by the justice system or they're already involved in it. And so a lot of the clinic's work focuses on representing the youth. It focuses on policy analysis and lobbying for change where there is improper policy, and then also educating youth on their rights. So there's really no surprise that it works a lot with the Wrongful Conviction Center, since there are certainly youth that face these kind of issues. And the students are getting a chance to represent youth start to finish. And so they're getting to work really hands-on with these kids, and not only just providing them important legal services, but also providing them guidance and other services that they're often deprived of outside of just the legal services. There's also a really great program where it's not just for students, but also social work students, where they're also able to kind of work hand in hand with these cases and gain really critical experience. Now the Civil Litigation Center. So the Civil Litigation Center at its core, it focuses on a wide variety of cases, mostly that are impacting impoverished clients. Mostly it has a strong focus on rent and landlord cases. And then there's also a community justice and civil litigation clinic within the center that looks at policies of policing and mass incarceration, and trying to kind of educate people on knowing your rights campaigns, as well as policy analysis, kind of similar to the Youth and Family Justice Center. So there's a ton of different work within this clinic, a lot of it really important. There's also a lot of work hand in hand with the Youth and Children's Center, just because so oftentimes there's kids who are caught up in the cases that the Civil Litigation Center focuses on. And again, students are really the ones taking these cases, taking the reins, handling these start to finish. And that's just the kind of experience that you're not going to get pretty much anywhere else. Next is our clinic, which we're going to expand on a ton more. It's the Complex Civil Litigation and Investor Protection Center. So we'll get into a lot of the details there, but in general, in complex civil litigation, we're handling cases in a wide variety of practice areas. I'm handling one right now that's dealing with an eviction, but that's just one example in many. And then on the investor protection side, we're kind of dealing with, again, cases from start to finish, but kind of understanding securities regulation, people who are defrauded by their brokers, and then we're working with either going through FINRA, which regulates brokerages and deals with the arbitration process on that side, or investment advisors, where you're going through more traditional litigation regulated by the SEC. And so there are different pathways, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more, but that's something that we do, which, and we talked about this actually in a different presentation, that really not a lot of schools in the country are doing, focusing on this area of securities protection for clients. So it's been really great doing this kind of work, and it is really quite important. Last few clinics and centers here, the Donald Pritzker Entrepreneurship Law Center. This one's definitely a little bit different because it focuses more on the business side of law. That's kind of a distinct aspect of the center, that most of these centers are focusing on litigation or policy analysis, but this is really more on navigating small business owners, entrepreneurs, startups in kind of the business world and the transactional side, which frankly a lot of students are doing. Not everybody at the school like me is going to become a litigator, so these are really important skills. A lot of JD MBA students who are kind of both getting a legal degree and a business degree, they kind of find an intersection here at the Center of Law and Business. And there's in fact a board for the Entrepreneur Law Center that is comprised of students, and the students are the ones who are really deciding the programming, deciding kind of how to fundraise, how to do outreach, and how to recruit students to the Law Center, which is kind of a cool aspect of it. So that's a lot of what the Entrepreneurship Law Center does, which again is a bit different. The Environmental Advocacy Center, this is looking at kind of environmental law problems, as you might guess, students tackling issues that are really going to intersect with law and policy. And this is diversified across Northwestern, kind of like some of the other clinics I talked about that really branch out just beyond law. Here we're working with undergraduate students that are touching on chemistry, biology, engineering, because it really is an intersection with the environmental science part of law and policy. There's a lot of coursework for students on environmental law, and then the kind of clinical side of it, where we're focusing on low-income communities, communities of color, who really frequently bear the burden of environmental policies that negatively affect our society. There's some examples of what the clinic has been doing. It includes waste cleanup in the Depew area that's been wrecked from kind of industrialization. It protects small farmers who see their farmland get harmed by fracking and kind of the byproducts of what fracking can do. And then kind of looking at energy efficiency, how we can kind of move and use more green energy, clean energy, and kind of representing those clients. And so really interesting work, and a much newer addition to the Bluhm Legal Clinic. Then the last clinic here is the MacArthur Justice Center. And this kind of overlaps with the Civil Rights Clinic that I mentioned earlier, but this was a center that was founded on kind of the principle of the death penalty, but it's really now expanded to a lot of negative areas of the criminal justice system. And so there's 4 main areas that the MacArthur Justice Center focuses on. That's the rights of communities through voting rights, immigration rights, rights of protesters, then combating the punishment of poverty in the legal system. That's combating cash bail, other unlawful fees and fines that you may face in the court system. holding police and prosecutors accountable through wrongful convictions, and then advocating for inmates' rights who are already imprisoned, where how do they have access to courts? Is solitary confinement appropriate? Parole rights, and then, of course, still the death penalty does remain a focus of the clinic. And just kind of an example of what the MacArthur Justice Center does. They've recently filed a cert petition, a case called Jackson v. Prentice. It's looking at the Eighth Amendment violation, cruel and unusual punishment of solitary confinement, whether or not that's a permissible constitutional thing to do to inmates. Another case, Williams v. City of Chicago. It's a class action against Chicago's implementation of ShotSpotter. The ShotSpotter technology, I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a technology that uses multiple detections of sound to identify gunshots and kind of place where a gunshot may have came from. And so it alerts the police, but there's a large number of misidentified shots, either false positives where it records a shot where one didn't exist, or false negatives where it misses a shot where one occurred. And so it's led to a lot of problems, and maybe more problems than the solutions it was supposed to implement. It's actually something I focused on in a different class, so it's a kind of an interesting case. But this is just a small fraction of what the MacArthur Justice Center is doing. And so I hope that kind of explains what the Bluhm Legal Clinic does. Just again, it canvasses so many different areas. It does a lot of different work, and really at the forefront, it's students who are leading this work, and it's them not only getting really practical experience, which I've enjoyed and I think has been one of the highlights of my legal career here at Northwestern, but also I think it's really great for clients too, who are many of which are helped each and every year. So turn it back to Professor Tenenbaum to talk a little bit more about the work that we're doing and, again, how to protect yourself from fraud.
Good evening. My name is Sam Tenenbaum. I'm a clinical professor at Northwestern, and I'm also the director of the clinic Jack described. We will be sending to you, for those who aren't here in person, the handouts that we have, which I'll just tell you about real briefly. The top couple pages will be the clinic's website, and there'll be links to each of the individual centers so you can learn more about them and actually see videos of clients of ours and read more about in detail the work we do, as well as a description of the center that I direct, the Complex Civil Litigation Investor Protection Center. There's also two other handouts. One is produced by FINRA, which Jack mentioned. They regulate and police the actions of securities brokers and securities investment advisors. And it's called Fighting Fraud 101. And it's a very good basic discussion of how you can avoid investment fraud, of which there is much and of which our clinic litigates. The other one just came out. It's a handout from ARP on, excuse me, how to be prepared for today's fraud. And it covers a whole wide variety of the kinds of frauds that can be committed. And as fast as frauds can be detected and figured out, ARP calls them entrepreneurs of fraud, figure out new ways to do it. One of the most recent ones was someone used AI to recreate the voice of a person's daughter, which they got off of their Instagram and Facebook posts, and claimed that the daughter was being held captive, and they wanted her to send money. She sent a lot of money to these people, and the daughter was not captive, and trying to catch them is very difficult. I'm going to talk a little bit more about fraud later. But in any event, we're going to send you the handouts in a PDF format, as well as links to various things mentioned in the handouts. I'm always happy to do outreach. It's very important. And one of the reasons it's important is people really are not educated in what their legal rights are, and also don't know where to find help with legal problems. And the third thing that we concentrate on a lot in my clinic is investor education. And we work very closely with FINRA, the Securities Exchange Commissions, and others to try to encourage that. One of the things that I've been promoting, and we hope will come to pass, is a high school requirement for financial literacy, so that high school students, before they go off to college, know what's the checking account, how do you balance it, what's a credit card, do you understand you have to pay back the credit card, what mortgages are, what investments are. New Jersey has a requirement, for example, in a very fine one-semester course on educating students in financial information. It's really good. A few other states are starting to get it, and I'm hopeful, since our clinic, since our law school is named after was funded by J.B. Pritzker, that hopefully I can get the governor's attention to do something about that. I think Jack, in describing the clinics, kind of described the wide variety of cases we have. A lot of the clinics interact with each other. We work together. We partner together. In the complex litigation and investor protection, we partner with a lot of outside law firms as well, which gives the students an added benefit in that they're able to work with really experienced, top-flight lawyers from all over the country. Let me just give you a kind of a hint of the kinds of cases we handle. We founded the clinic initially to do civil rights cases based on wrongful convictions. There were a number of people who are centered on wrongful convictions were getting exonerated, but they didn't have any means to obtain compensation. And so we formed the clinic to represent those people in lawsuits against police officers, state's attorneys, government officials who had caused their wrongful conviction. And we've been very successful. We've recovered well in excess of $100 million on behalf of these folks, and helped them really have a life after spending as much as 30 years in jail for a crime they did not commit. We do a variety of other civil rights cases as well. We also handle a wide variety of different types of fraud cases. When I was in private practice, I handled a lot of fraud cases. It hasn't stopped since I began the clinic. One of the larger ones and complicated ones we're working on now involves the largest reverse mortgage, which you may or may not know what it is, but you've probably seen Tom Selleck on TV in a commercial. Frauds in the country. Our clients there were over 100 African-American families that had the equity in their home stolen. They were originally promised free grants to pay for repairs to their homes. All these are in the inner city in Chicago, in the west side and in the south side. Unknowingly to the folks, they actually signed a reverse mortgage. They were told it was okay to sign the paperwork because the government was then going to fund through the grants the money to pay it off. It was a total scam and fraud. And collectively, they lost in excess of $10 million. People have had their homes foreclosed. We're in the process of litigating on behalf of 30 families in one case to get those mortgages set aside. And there's a number of foreclosure cases that we're defending. The case also expanded and involved us being involved. One of the lenders filed a $10 billion bankruptcy in New York. We ended up getting involved and litigating in that bankruptcy. My students were able to work on it. As well as we've done several appeals, including one that went to the Illinois Supreme Court in connection with the foreclosure process and attempting to get the mortgages set aside. We actually have one case on appeal now, which my students handle, and another one that's going to be on appeal shortly. We're part of a team, along with some of the top class action lawyers in the country, that worked on the largest crypto fraud case in the country. It was a $4 billion crypto fraud case. We're in the process of actually getting that case settled, and students have worked on that. Like I said earlier, we do handle securities fraud. We do a lot of work on elder fraud. The amount of elder abuse that occurs in financial fraud is frankly overwhelming. And we also have just a number of investor protection cases where we represent smaller investors. Now, the other cases I've described, they're big cases. They last for a long time. And students come through and work on whatever section of the case is going on when they're in the clinic, they work on. But the investor cases, students try to take from beginning to end. And we help people fight fraud by their brokers or investment advisors. And those frauds can range from outright theft of people's investments. They promise that their money's being invested in one thing and actually have it taken. We had one where a banker at a well-known Chicago bank said he was investing the money in a real estate deal and instead used it to pay child support. And the person lost most of his savings. And they're small, the cases are not huge. Some of the cases are $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, but for a lot of people, that's their savings. That literally is their life savings. For example, the fellow I mentioned who ended up paying this banker's child support, he lost $30,000. And that was literally his life savings other than Social Security. He'd worked as a truck driver for Marshall Fields for his entire career. As I mentioned, there's a lot of elder fraud. There's what we call affinity fraud. What is affinity fraud? You probably haven't heard that term. Affinity fraud is when someone in a group with which you identify cheats you and uses the fact you are in the same group to enhance their status with you in order to cheat you. So for example, I'll use the bank case again. The banker was African American. Our client was African American. He felt very proud that he was, that it was special. He was dealing with somebody working at a bank as a bank officer who was of the same race. So what happened? He trusted him. That's what affinity fraud's about. It's about a false sense of trust. I've had members of the same church where the president of the church cheated a bunch of the members of the church by convincing them to invest in something, and it was a total fraud. Had relatives come to people. I mean, literally, if you think about any group you can be in, it could be a knitting group. It could be, an ethnic group, racial group, educational group, social group, Lions, veterans group, whatever it is. Fraud occurs in all of them. And you just have to be watchful. I'll give one quick tip. If you want to avoid fraud, before you invest or give somebody your money, check with somebody else. See if it makes sense. We had one case where a client was convinced that he had won a multi-million-dollar sweepstakes and ended up losing all of his money to a scammer who told him he was from the federal government, was running the sweepstakes, and they needed money to get money. And he ended up losing several $100,000, his total life savings. And we're in the process of trying to sue the banks that allowed that to happen. And that's just one example. We literally, we have tens of cases like this going on at any one time. I think one of the ways to kind of explain what we do in a little bit more detail, and I think I have time for this, is I want to tell you what cases Jack's been working on. Jack started in my clinic last fall. I'm going to talk about 3 cases he's been involved in. The first involves a disabled person who was asked to make an investment. Now, the investment started out pretty good because it was throwing off a cash flow. What he didn't understand was that if he needed any of the money, he couldn't withdraw it. The way the investment was structured, he had no right to withdraw it. without incurring penalties, substantial penalties. And because he was disabled, in his mind, he thought, oh, this is great. This stream of payments is going to continue forever. But the investment didn't work that way. And so Jack's been working on dealing with the client, dealing with the brokerage firm, preparing the legal papers necessary to sue the brokerage firm over it. And we're about ready to start that lawsuit. So that's been one project Jack worked on. We have another one that's kind of a strange case, but there's an important lesson. We were asked to represent someone who had lived in this home for 20 years, had married her husband had owned the home before they met. They got married. She moved into the home. She helped pay the mortgage for probably 15 plus years. He died. He did not have a will. And what did she find out upon his death? That a prior partner, not married to him, had been on the deed of the house as a co-owner. So, and legally, technically, she was the owner of the home once he died. And she sought to evict this woman who was a friend of a friend's. So Jack's been working on that case. So we've been defending an eviction suit. Jack's been handling all of that, handling the court proceedings, negotiating with the other lawyer. We filed a lawsuit seeking to have our client, what's called eminent domain, which means if you live in a property and claim an ownership over a period of time, the ownership becomes yours, as well as a claim for all the money she put into the house. She wants it back, but you can't blame her. We had a mediation, which Jack ran with a mediator from the court to try to settle the case. And Jack right now is working on an attempt to try to get the case settled, which he's promised me he's going to get done before he graduates. So that's his mission.
Ticking clock.
That's his mission. Jack's also worked on another case, and I think this time-wise should work out just about right. We represent, and we have a national practice. We're one of the few clinics in the country that does that. We have cases all over, and we have investor cases all over because most of the investor centers are in New York. They only handle cases in New York. There's one or two scattered around the country, but they only handle localized cases. We take cases really from all over the country where we're allowed to practice. Illinois is very good about allowing students under what's called Rule 711 to actually act as lawyers. Jack can actually go to court, handle the whole case as long as the person is not subject to being incarcerated, go to jail for more than a year. Other than that, I can give it to Jack, say, Jack, handle it. I would trust Jack with that. We represent the estate of a young man. He was driving from his home in New Orleans to Florida. He was driving through southern Alabama. He had a one-car accident in a rainstorm. He skidded off the road. And he ultimately, through a series of just terrible, I don't want to use the word coincidence, just terrible events, ended up being shot and killed by a deputy sheriff. Now, my students have worked on the case, and this case has been going on for a few years. We investigated the case carefully. We do that with every single one of our cases. I don't care if it's $5 or $5 million. We're very careful about the cases that we take because we have to be. We get really hundreds of requests a year to take on cases, and obviously we don't have the personnel to do that. The students did a phenomenal job, second by second, reviewing a number of different videos that were taken of what happened from different angles, and really did a good job piecing it together. We ended up filing a lawsuit in federal court in southern Alabama. We took discovery, depositions. We hired an expert, one of the top experts in the field of police procedure. He actually was the expert for the state of Florida in the famous Ted Bundy case. Students worked with the expert, got the expert ready for deposition, got the expert's report prepared. And then the other side filed what's called a motion for summary judgment, which basically says that we don't have to have a trial because the facts aren't in dispute, and based on what the facts are, we're entitled to be dismissed from the case. My students put together a great brief, had clips of the videos, photos, different angles. We had wonderful deposition testimony. And contrary to what a lot of lawyers who do civil rights lawyers in Alabama thought, we actually won. The judge denied their summary judgment motion. Now you would normally say, okay, what happens next? Well, normally you go to trial, but there's a doctrine called qualified immunity, and which allows the sheriff's department in this case, and the deputy sheriff who shot our client, it allows them to appeal immediately. And so we had an appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in Atlanta. Once again, the other side wrote a brief. My students put together a response brief. The other side filed a reply brief. Then there were some new cases that we found out about. So we filed a supplement, and the other side filed a supplement. And then in November, we had what's called an oral argument, where we actually go before a panel of 3 judges and talk about the case. That was in Montgomery, Alabama. Jack came with me. And for weeks beforehand, we prepared for the oral argument. But Jack was there with me, preparing precisely how we were going to present our case and why the appeal should not be granted. It was an interesting argument. Jack was very helpful. He sat right at the counsel table with me and passed me notes when I screwed up. And we're waiting for a result. This case quite possibly could go to the U.S. Supreme Court, because there's a fascinating legal issue about whether, given the kinds of factual disputes in the case, whether if they lose it, whether they should be allowed to appeal or not. And their courts are divided as to whether or not they should have a right to appeal or not. So one of the things we've done is work with our Supreme Court clinic in setting it up to make sure we've preserved our right to appeal if need be. So that's just what one student's worked on, all right, in 1 year. I hope that gives you a flavor for what we do. I just want to see. I want to tell you about one more case, if I might. I don't know, do you have very many questions in the chat?
I just have one question, and then one question I have myself.
All right, we'll get to those 2 in a minute. But I want to tell you about another case. And it was very sad. And it's something for those of you who have senior parents or are senior yourselves. It's important, for example, in the eviction case that Jack's been handling, if they would have had a lawyer handle it when they got married, they would have switched the title, the other person would have agreed, and there wouldn't have been a problem 20 years later. So it's very important to get some kind of consultation, and there are a lot of different organizations that will be available to help. We had another one where elderly woman, telemarketer called, told her about this great investment in a resort somewhere in Central America, and she started just wire transferring money to them. And she ended up wire transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars to this company that ended up, when we finally traced the funds, we ultimately found out they were in Nicaragua. And in some of the cases, I want you to know, we've got one now where somebody preyed on someone who was an immigrant and told them that they were from INS and threatened them. They lost $4 million. A number of our cases, we work with the FBI, we work with local law enforcement, to do what we can. But in this case I'm going to talk about, the money went to Nicaragua. The daughter obtained actually an order putting her in charge of finances. Did that stop the mother? No. Whatever money she got, she would wire to these people at the investment place. She was put in a nursing home, and she had an allowance every week. Turns out she was saving up her allowance, not spending it on things she needed, and ended up sending it away again. And it got so bad that the mother actually borrowed money from one of her friends in the nursing home and sent that money. And the family had to repay that to the other person. Excuse me. These are very sad stories. And, it's very difficult if you're a senior, you say, it's my money, I want to do what I want to do with it, and you can't tell me. And from the family's point of view, it's, Mom, why are you doing this? And we don't have enough systems, frankly, in place to fairly protect people. One of the things that we're just starting to see is lawsuits against banks that allow these kinds of transfers to go forward. In other words, why should this elderly woman be sending money to Nicaragua? What's the purpose of that? And banks could stop it, or they could question, or they could get someone else involved. So it's very important on both ends to communicate and educate. Why don't we do the questions? Yes.
Oh, so do you award, if somebody has a question about their new startup, like I started a little business, if I have questions in pertaining to that, can I come to the clinic and talk to someone?
What you do is you contact, each of the clinics.
Could you repeat?
Yes, the question is if one of the members of the audience is working on a startup and may have some legal questions, and what should they do? Each of our clinics has an intake procedure, and if you look on the Pritzker, that's another Pritzker, I think it's his uncle, donated that money. A Pritzker Entrepreneurship Center, if you contact them, they can arrange for a student, because you're going to be dealing with students, but it's okay.
Oh yeah, they're great, right?
No, but they can help provide you with basic advice and answer your questions. And in fact, we help incorporate, we help do partnership agreements, provide more than just, tell you what to do, goodbye. It's much more than that.
Great, okay.
All right.
So online, there's a question. Do you deal with car insurance companies for property damage cases?
Sometimes, it depends. Normally, we don't, but it depends on the nature of the case. And one of the things we look at is if there's bad practice that's being applied across the board. And look, that's another reason we need to have financial literacy. People need to understand what insurance is, how to make sure they have the right insurance. And even if you're educated, when I was in private practice, I had a client, a very successful businessman, was in a terrible accident and had a big BMW that got totaled. He was almost killed. The driver of the other car was killed. The other driver caused the accident. He did not have any insurance, did not have any money. My client had insurance, covered his medical bills. He thought he had the right car insurance, and so they replaced the car. One little problem, the car was leased, and because it was leased, there was a special coverage he needed to have. And while he was in the hospital, he ended up getting a bill from the insurance company for $15,000 because he didn't have the right insurance. When he told me, I immediately called my insurance agent and I said, do I have the right insurance? But it's really important people educate themselves on what it all means. And, there are also governmental agencies that if you're really getting screwed around by an insurance company, that you can contact the Illinois Department of Insurance, and they have consumer bureaus that can be very helpful. So there are resources for almost everyone. Not enough. Believe me, there are not enough resources for the legal needs people have. I think you had one more question.
Actually, I have two questions.
All right.
My first question is about the investor education that you talked about earlier. So the links that you're going to be sending, are any of them having educational videos on it to educate people?
I don't, there may be some, not on the ARP one, there may be some on FINRA, but on the FINRA one, if you go to their FINRA website, they actually have videos, and you can find some of these on YouTube, of actual videos where they've caught people who've been committing a fraud, or brokers. It's interesting. One of the things, brokerage firms used to record everything you said, but they've stopped. You wonder why? Because what would happen is there'd be a problem. A person would say, broker told me A, B, and C. The broker would say, I never said A, B, and C. They would subpoena the tapes that the brokerage firm had, and sure enough, the broker told them A, B, and C. So they decided, maybe this isn't as useful. They realized it was more dangerous for them to have the tapes than to do the tapes in terms of protecting themselves. So, but there are plenty of videos out there where you can see all different kinds of frauds being committed. And I tell you, we've seen them all. Not all, but most.
So going to the tapes, if the brokers are no longer taping anything, and would a person can tape a conversation with a broker?
All right, now that's interesting. If you're here in Illinois, what's called a two-party state. And what that means is you have to have the consent of both parties who are on the tape in order to legally tape them. Otherwise, it's a felony. All right, and that tape will not be able to be used in a case, even though you have the person actually admitting whatever wrongdoing they have. That's Illinois. It's a two-party state. Even though we're being taped, I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of that was put in by public officials who didn't want their constituents to have them on tape. They want to know what they were being taped, as opposed to promises they made or other bad acts. Other states, I've studied this pretty much in detail, although the exact numbers escape me. I think there's about 35 states where it's one party, which means either party can tape. And then the rest of the states in the District of Columbia are two-party states. So in Illinois, you can do it if you say, would you mind if I tape this? And they say yes, but be sure you have that consent on tape. Okay?
Very true.
All right.
Okay.
The other thing is that you will all have, from the cover page, if you click on Complex Civil Litigation and Investor Protection Center, you'll all have the ability to reach me if you have any further questions. And we're certainly happy to help. And one of the reasons we do this is it kind of helps open up people's eyes to what's going on, what can happen to them. And just being educated in something a little bit even can be helpful. Just be careful what you click on a link. Don't give out your social security number. If people promise you something and it sounds too good to be true, it is. And there's no free lunch. Unless the library's having a free lunch.
Okay,
Right.
we did get another question, and I'm trying to.
What, there's one more?
Follow-up from the previous question.
Yeah. This person says, driving, it's a follow-up to that personal injury one. Driving for Amazon delivery, hit and run in Chicago downtown. Amazon third party is saying, third party saying you're riding for commercial, so it has to be paid from Amazon. And both are refusing to pay. Both have issued letter for denial for payment.
Somebody was hurt in a crash?
I'm not able to see the full thing.
Okay, but it sounds like no one was hurt, but there was some kind of accident, and Amazon is saying that the person's personal insurance should cover the damage, and the personal insurance is saying you were riding for commercial purposes, so the company should pay for it.
Just the car was damaged, not
Right.
hurt.
I don't want to give specific because I'd have to see the policies that both sides have and understand more of the details. But normally in a car, let's say you have a rear ender situation, and like I was out of town and somebody rear-ended it and took off most of the backside of the car. Normally you would have your insurance company pay the damage, and then your insurance company would then go after the other person's insurance company. So, but in this case, it sounds like there's a dispute as to whether they were covered under their own policy. It's a question of if they were driving for Amazon with their personal vehicle or something like that, whether their own private insurance, personal insurance on their car covers that kind of additional activity. It's like Uber. Uber drivers all drive their own cars. They're not driving an Uber car. Now, Uber does have its own policy that covers its drivers, but even if you're an Uber driver, you got to be sure exactly what's covered, what isn't covered, and how it affects your own personal insurance as well. That's tricky. It's not easy. I can't say any more really than that. It's tricky, and not easy is when you're dealing with an insurance company.
I have a question. How does one come to know, or what are the criteria that qualifies a person
For the clinic?
for the clinic?
It depends on the case. Depends on the case. For our investor cases, we look at what the amount of the loss is. It's not a completely hard and fast rule. It's on our website. We look at what their income is, how much of their net worth, if somebody's worth $4 million and they've lost $10,000, I probably will not take that case. Okay? If somebody's lost $10,000 and they make $50,000 a year and they only have $30,000 of investment, we're much more likely to take that case in terms of qualification. So we look at the entire financial picture. And we also, I have to be honest with you, and people need to know this, we take less than 10% of the inquiries that we get. And some of it is, one of the reasons the SEC and FINRA like having clinics is we act as kind of a screening mechanism, okay? And we can screen out cases that really we feel have no merit. A lot of times people think that, the brokerage firm had to do something wrong, but these days a lot of people think that they're trading geniuses and they think they know what they're doing. And they go, all I can say is you better be sure you do. They go online, they have an account with Charles Schwab, something like that. They do their own trading. The brokerage firm doesn't provide any advice, and they don't know what they're doing, and they screw up, and they lose a lot of money. And then they come to us and say, can I sue Charles Schwab? And my answer after looking at it, and we study it, is, what did Schwab do wrong? You did all this yourself. What was your training, right? So we do screen out a lot of cases, and because of the number of cases that come to us, we aren't able to take every case, even if it's meritorious, which is really sad, because frankly, a lot of the folks who come to us, we're the last resort. If we can't help them, there's really no place else for them to go. And those are the ones that hurts when we have to turn it down because we don't have enough people to be able to handle their case. I try to take them, which is why my students are probably complain that they're overworked, but even overworking them, we can't take them all.
I have a follow-up to that, and I know you mentioned that investor law legal clinics are limited, but besides Bluhm's Law Clinic, there are other law schools?
In Chicago, there are 6 law schools in the Chicago area. 7 if you count Northern Illinois and DeKalb. And Southern Illinois has a clinic, and University of Illinois in Champaign has a clinic. So there's 9 total. Yes, there are other clinics. They do a variety of different work, but when it comes to investor work, we're it. And basically from, we're the only one west of Pittsburgh for the rest of the whole country.
Only one not in the Eastern time zone.
Right. We're the only one not in the Eastern time zone.
And those clinics also tend to not be able to take out-of-state
Right.
residents either, especially if you're from Illinois, since we're so local. They really can't take on other clinics, which is a broader kind of national problem.
Right. And it's something that we brought to the attention of the SEC and FINRA.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to that. I want to thank you for the opportunity for Jack and myself to do this presentation. And also,
you.
I'd love to get the link to the recording.
Yes, and thank you, Professor Tenenbaum and Jack. Very, very helpful information. I look forward to the handouts and the links that you'll be sending us. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.